Hello ATS EVS 105 students, Dr. Shragi here. Hey, you know that quote you just saw, that's kind of dark and meant to be a little bit funny, I suppose. But here's the deal. It brings up a valid point. I mean, there's all these deniers out there and they are going to see that they are wrong. I mean, the science is not unclear on this point. On the other hand, it is a perfectly legitimate point to wonder why you should be worried about any of this. I mean, the sun will come out tomorrow, we've dealt with change in the past. It's a perfectly valid question to ask, why should I care about climate change? And there's a lot of reasons why you might be, I don't want to say skeptical, but have questions as to why this should matter to you. I mean, we've seen diagrams that look like this in the past that show what the model projections for future climate are going to be. And if you zoom in on the year 2100, you can see that we're expecting somewhere on the order of a few degrees Celsius of climate change by the year 2100. Somewhere between 2 and 3 or 4 degrees Celsius, depending on which scenario turns out to be closest to the real emissions that we emit. 2, maybe 3 degrees Celsius of warming may not seem like a whole lot. I mean, plenty of places in the world have annual ranges of temperature that are more than 50 degrees Celsius or 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Omaha, in their annual cycle. Omaha is probably one of them. There's certainly more than a 90-degree range of temperature in Omaha in any given year. For that matter, there's plenty of places that have about half that big of a diurnal, or day within the day, the difference between the day and the night in terms of their temperature change. Plenty of deserts have more than 50 degrees Fahrenheit of temperature change between the nighttime low and the daytime high. Surely this temperature change of just a few degrees Celsius over the next 100 years is insignificant. It would be a perfectly reasonable thing to wonder why we should care about a global average temperature change of just a few degrees as being anything we should worry about. But in that case, your intuition is wrong. I like what the book's actual words about this were. It says, although the temperature on any given place can vary considerably by season, by day, and even within a day, the variations tend to cancel when averaged over the entire globe. It's because of this cancellation, the average temperature of the globe is actually very stable. Moreover, seemingly small changes in global average temperatures are associated with significant shifts in the climate. I mean, they cite this example of how during the last ice age, the global mean temperature was only about 5 to 8 degrees Celsius below what it is now, and for all intents and purposes, the last glacial maximum was a different planet. Sea levels were tens of meters lower than they are now. Very different species of animals were thriving. Very different kinds of agriculture would have been possible if we were doing agriculture back at that time, and so on. So, relatively small changes in the mean temperature result in big climate changes, and they can also have very big impacts on people. This skyline that you're seeing here is Cologne, Germany. I've actually lived a lot of my life in Cologne. Part of my job used to be at the University of Cologne. And I actually lived there back in 2003, and in 2003 they had a major heat wave in Europe. Tens of thousands of people died across Europe. It's astonishing how many people die when there's excessive heat. And the average temperature in Europe during that summer was only 3.5 degrees Celsius warmer than the long-term average. The same is true in the United States. In the United States, heat-related causes of death are actually the single largest cause of weather-related fatalities. A small temperature change really does make that big of a difference. And it's not, in this case, just about the amount of warming, it's how fast that warming is happening. I mean, since the last glacial maximum, the planet has warmed between 5 and 8 degrees Celsius, and that has taken about a 10,000-year period to do that. We are currently warming at a rate of about 1 degree Celsius per century. That's 25 times faster. Okay? The natural world just simply hasn't seen temperature changes that fast, and the rate of warming matters because it tells us about how much time we are going to have to adapt. Humans are clever. We're going to find ways to live in the world that is changing. The problem is, it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be cheap to get there. We need time to change how we raise food, change what parts of the world we live in, change the infrastructure, move people away from coastlines, and so on. That's all going to take time and money, and the more time we have to do it, the better. Now, a perfectly reasonable objection people might have as to why they should care about global warming is they say, oh, but surely this has all happened before. Surely we have had climate changes like this in the past. Well, not particularly. I mean, we live in a world where there is a lot of built infrastructure. We have I like the words of from your book right here. It says, modern human society with a population of several billion people and metropolitan areas with tens of millions of people and a reliance on industrial farming and large-scale built infrastructure, that whole modern civilization thing is only a century or two old. Modern society has simply never had to face warming like this on the order of a few degrees per century. All of this stuff that makes the modern world work has never been tested with that kinds of change. And later in this lecture, you're going to see all the kinds of change modern society is going to have to deal with in the face of global warming. Now, another objection that you're going to hear from time to time from people about whether they should care about global warming or not is they're going to say, maybe warming is better. I mean, I like what your book said about how, a warm day, you might picture that means more days at the pool, or that might mean, your grass in your yard stays greener longer. I don't know how to make it simpler than just to say warming is not better. Human society and our natural world around us are adapted to the present climate. We live in a world where we have built our infrastructure and and the crops that we raise and so on are based on the present climate. By definition, any change from the present climate then is something we will be less well adapted to deal with as a society. In other words, when it comes to climate change, change is bad. Change is always bad. Let me give you a good example of what I mean by that. This is a map I got from the USDA website that shows where we grow corn in the United States, okay? It's how many bushels there are in each county of around the country. Obviously, there's a corn belt where at the present time we are growing the corn. But in the future, this may not continue to be the best place to grow corn. There could be changes in temperature that affect the rates at which the corn plants grow and the pollinators that are able to pollinate the corn, although corn is largely, that's not exactly how it works. Changes in the number of extremely hot days might result in lower yields. There are changes in risks in severe weather. There could be changes in the bacteria that are living in the soil that are breaking things down and providing nutrients and so on. There could be changes in the insects and other pests associated with climate change. There could be changes in the rainfall distribution across the United States. None of that is conducive to this continuing to be the best place to grow corn. Well, let's just hypothetically say, oh, but actually the corn belt would just shift a few hundred miles farther to the north. A perfectly reasonable solution, and maybe that even is a reasonable solution on the order of, like, if we had centuries to prepare for that. But it isn't entirely obvious that this would even work. It may not be that that is a particularly efficient place to grow corn on an industrial scale. It takes a lot of infrastructure to grow and raise corn on an industrial scale. You need big, expensive facilities where you store the corn, like grain elevators. You need expensive railway distribution systems to move the corn from where it is grown to where it is being consumed. You need heavy equipment like combines and tractors and so on that all cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Each of which has to be financed, and there has to be bankers who know how to finance such things and know the risks and know whether or not to approve these loans and so on. And more importantly, you need farmers. Farmers are a huge source of institutional knowledge. There's no particular reason to think the people who live where the corn belt will be know anything about how to grow corn. They don't know what the right times to plant it are, the right ways to fertilize it, how to know when it's time to harvest it, and so on. All of that is a major complication. It's all solvable if we invest, if we take the time to make it all work and so on, but that's not entirely clear that we're going to do that. Plus, there's no reason to think any of that stuff will be in place by the time we need to be growing corn there, and something already lives in those places. Okay, maybe that's currently habitat for certain animals. Tearing it up to grow corn there is not necessarily the right idea. Maybe there's crops they already grow there. Let's just say wheat. Where are we going to grow the wheat now if we have to move that out of that area and place and grow corn there instead? This is not a simple problem. Again, on the order of centuries, we're going to find ways. Necessity is the mother of invention. We'll figure these things out on the order of centuries, but I'm not going to be there. And my kids aren't going to be there, and even my grandchildren might not be there by the time these solutions are in place. We are not well adapted for those kinds of changes. We have trillions of dollars of infrastructure and knowledge in growing corn where we do it now. Shifting it a couple hundred miles to the north is not a viable option on like the length of time of like a human lifetime. I like another example of how we're poorly adapted for climate change that comes from your book, and that was this business about roads built on permafrost. There's a surprising amount of infrastructure once you get farther north into northern Alaska and northern Canada that is built on permafrost. And the idea of this frozen soil as being kind of a nice roadbed material or a nice housing material or whatever is because it's as hard as concrete. We can build the thousands of miles of road it takes to have roads up to oil fields and things like that we need. But all that permafrost is melting under global change, and we are experiencing, these roads and these houses and these pipelines that go through there are failing as the ground shifts, as the permafrost melts. Again, you might think, oh, some yucky road out to some oil drilling town in northern Canada or something isn't so important, but that's the infrastructure we're using to get to that oil or that pipeline or whatever. And so it's all at risk because we are shifting and having melting of these permafrost. This is not to say that there won't be benefits to global warming. Any kind of climate event any kind of natural event for that matter, has both winners and losers. In one of my other classes, in the tropical meteorology class, we actually fairly explicitly go through and talk about the fact that even something as obviously destructive as a hurricane has winners and losers. There are benefits to, say, the construction industry when a hurricane comes ashore, because all those homes have to be rebuilt. But there are also losers, right? And you can talk about that in terms of tornadoes or landslides or volcanic eruptions or climate change. There are people who are going to get rich from climate change. There are going to be people who lose everything because of climate change. Neither of those are really good outcomes. We don't really want to be redistributing wealth over climate change. All right, we're going to move forward in part 2 of this lecture to be talking more about some specific changes that we're anticipating. But before we do that, let's do a couple quick questions here. Question 1. The present rate of global warming is about blank times faster than the warming that has occurred since the end of the last glacial maximum. 5, 25, 5,000, or trick question. The current warming is fast, but not as fast as the warming at the end of the last ice age. Which of those numbers explains how much faster the current warming is than the warming at the end of the last ice age that changed the planet? Take a look at those 4 options and make a choice and get a little feedback before you move on to question 2.